The Cuyuna Iron Range is located in central Minnesota near Crosby, Ironton, Riverton, and the town of Cuyuna, about 15 miles from Brainerd. Cuyuna supplied iron ore and manganese for about 80 years before the last mine closed in 1984. Part of the Cuyuna Range was turned into the Cuyuna State Recreation Area in 1993. It is now known for fishing, kayaking, hiking, camping, and scuba diving. The hills of overburden left over from iron mining are excellent for mountain biking. The lake behind me looks like any of the other 11,842 lakes in Minnesota, but this one isn't like any other. It is, in fact, unique. At 450 feet, it's the deepest lake within Minnesota, but this isn't a natural lake. This is the Portsmouth Mine Lake. And something happened here in 1957 that has a direct connection to our landing on the moon just 12 years later. This is the story of Project Man-High, from Cuyuna to the moon. Well, that prompts a lot of questions, doesn't it? What was Project Man-High? What's the connection to the space program? Why Minnesota? And why Cuyuna? Man-High was an Air Force program designed to test what extended exposure to the near space environment might do to a human passenger, along with the design and engineering of what became a space capsule. The goal was to send a manned balloon to 100,000 feet, the mid-stratosphere, keep him there for 1 day, and return him safely to Earth. The first 2 of the 3 Man-High flights were in Minnesota. Why Minnesota? Because General Mills is based here. In 1946, General Mills founded an aeronautical research division. They hired Otto Winzen as chief engineer. In 1949, Winzen left General Mills and founded Winzen Research Incorporated with his wife Vera, who was an engineer. She went on to become one of the finest plastic balloon builders in the world and an accomplished artist. Dr. John Stopp, chief of the Aeronautical Field Laboratory, approved Project Man-High. Stopp was a pioneer in acceleration and deceleration effects on humans. He was called the fastest man on Earth after he rode a rocket sled 632 miles an hour. Much of his work focused on seats and safety harnesses for future space flights. Dr. David Simmons of the Aeronautical Field Laboratory was appointed the Air Force Project Officer and was chief scientist for Man-High. He would ascend in Man-High 2. Winzen was recruited by Stopp and Simmons to build a balloon and capsule for Project Man-High. Winzen also made plastic bags, the kind you find in the produce section of your grocery store, and Otto Winzen was passionate about Project Man-High. This is the kind of plastic the balloon was made of. Very strong for its size, but still fragile. The balloon needed to raise 1,000 pounds to 100,000 feet would be massive. This is about a foot long. The Man-High balloons were 300 feet long. Filled with 30 million cubic feet of helium, they were as tall as a 30-story building. We used them to bring home apples. Project Man-High used them to send Dr. David Simmons to the edge of space. A test flight, Man-High 1, was launched from Fleming Field in South St. Paul on June 1, 1957, with test pilot Colonel Joseph Kittinger in the capsule. It didn't go well. The radio failed and his oxygen ran low. Turns out a valve was installed backwards, and he had just enough oxygen to make it back to Earth. Kittinger would later set a world record for the highest skydive from a height of 19 miles in 1960. He was also the first man to make a solo crossing of the Atlantic in a gas balloon. In 2012, he worked on Project Red Bull Stratos, directing Felix Baumgartner in his record-breaking 24-mile freefall, breaking Kittinger's record. The next question is, why Cuyuna? Well, remember, the balloon is huge but fragile. What you need is a place with no wind. Where is there no wind? How about the bottom of a 450-foot hole in the middle of Minnesota? Portsmouth Mine Pit at Cuyuna was perfect. It's a great fishing lake today, but in 1957, you could drive to the bottom, set up your equipment, and launch your balloon, and that's exactly what they did. Man-Hi 2 was launched from the bottom of Portsmouth Mine Pit at 9:22 a.m. on August 19, 1957. Simmons ascended to a height of 101,516 feet in 2 hours 20 minutes. The capsule contained several instruments, including a telescope and several radiation detectors. Part of the mission was to test the design and endurance of the gondola, which led to the development of the capsules used in the manned space program. Also, as the NASA History website says, the most important single scientific instrument was Major Simmons himself. Simmons came down 32 hours later near Aberdeen, South Dakota. He had been in the capsule for 44 hours. Winzen noted this was longer than the time spent by Charles Lindbergh in his first solo flight over the Atlantic 30 years earlier. Well, if you're going to mine iron ore at Cuyuna, the first thing you have to do is get to it. It's not on the surface. It's down there maybe 100 or 200 feet or more. And you could dig a shaft, and they certainly did that here at Cuyuna. But Portsmouth and many of the other mines were open pit mines. They would take the overburden off the top and pile it up off to the side. And that's where I'm at right now. I'm on top of one of those piles of what they called overburden. This one's about 100 feet tall, and this one plays a significant part in our story of Project Man-Hi, because this is the place where Stop set up his communication and command post. Back in 1957, of course, there were no trees. You could drive up here, and you could have you can't even see Portsmouth Mine Pit through the trees now, but it's right over there, trust me. And so Stop had a good view of everything that was going on. Now, the balloon took off at 9:22 in the morning. They thought it would head west, and it did, although they thought it would go as far as Miles City, Montana. Mother Nature had other plans. So Stop started here. He then went to Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, and later to Fargo, North Dakota, and then met the balloon when it came down in Aberdeen, South Dakota. So that's why we have Man-Hi Hill, and that is Man-Hi Trail, and now I get to bike down, and gravity is my friend. Project Man-Hi is a story of some very colorful and interesting, dedicated, and courageous people. Man-Hi was woefully underfunded from the start, and the Winzens even put in their own money at one point to keep it going. The courage, ingenuity, and passion shown by Kittinger, Stop, Simmons, and the Winzens, all for science, was truly remarkable. Man-Hi 3 was scheduled for Cuyuna on September 30th, 1957, but prolonged poor weather caused the flight to be moved to Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. Clifton McClure endured a 12-hour flight reaching 100,000 feet. At one point in the flight, his heartbeat reached 180 beats per minute and his respiration 60. His body temperature soared to 108.5 degrees. He survived. On May 5, 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American to travel into space. He got there by rocket launched from Cape Canaveral, Florida. Less than a year later, John Glenn made 3 orbits of the Earth, and on July 20, 1969, just 12 years after Dr. David Simmons lifted off from Cuyuna in a capsule attached to what one of the team called a profoundly engineered vegetable bag, Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. Well, now you know a little bit about Project Man-Hi, but there is so much more to the Man-Hi story. If you'd like to learn more, I suggest you watch the PBS program Spacemen, part of the American Experience series. Simmons wrote a book about his experience. It's titled Man-Hi. It's available online. and Touching Space, the story of Project Man-High by George Kennedy. After Man-High came Project Mercury. That story was told by Tom Wolfe in his book and later movie, The Right Stuff. I'm Dan Hegstead, Easy Street Productions. I tell stories. Thank you for watching Project Man-High, from Cuyuna to the Moon.